have graduation, right? So we have a lot of young people who are graduating, and you might say this person has blossomed into an adult, or well, usually it's a very positive thing. So we might say they blossomed into a fine young person, or a fine young man, or a fine young woman. They have blossomed into something like that. So it means that they have grown up into this, or they've opened into this. So it's a positive word. We don't usually, I've never heard blossomed into a bad word or bad thing happen. We just say it's blossomed into something that's good, right? So, okay. So anyhow, one more time, why don't we say together, blossom, blossom, bloom, bloom, blooming. Okay, and then this word up here we just mentioned, southwest monsoon. Southwest monsoon. Right, so we might just say that right now we are experiencing some monsoon rains, right, because of the rain that comes every year. I know in India they get a very, very serious monsoon every year that brings an enormous amount of rain. And people actually look forward to, I mean, obviously the rain sometimes causes flooding and things like that, but I know that in India they really look forward to the monsoon because it breaks the heat. You know, the heat is really extreme, like 40, 50 degrees, and then it starts raining, and it brings the temperature down, just like it does in Taiwan sometimes. Okay. So anyhow, I thought today we would start with this article. You know, it's funny, yesterday I was about to go out in the evening, and I was looking through my drawer to put on a t-shirt, and I noticed I had this t-shirt. It just was right there, and it was an old June 4th t-shirt that I bought. I bought it actually many years ago from, it was one of our events, and I bought it from, I'm sure you know the name, Wu Kaishi. Yeah. So I know him because, you know, his wife is from Taichung. And so I was talking to him one day, this is like over 10 years ago, or 15, 20 years ago. And he said, oh, I have this t-shirt. We have an event. Would you like to support it? I was like, sure, I'll buy a t-shirt. So I bought this t-shirt, and I had it sitting around, and I saw it yesterday just by chance. And I thought, oh, I'll put it on because it's June 4th. So anyhow, obviously this is a very important day for many people, and it's very controversial too, because in many places you cannot mention it, especially China. So it says here, June 4th will never be forgotten, Lai says. A different path. While discussion of the Tiananmen Square massacre is taboo in China, Taiwanese are free to discuss it and criticize their government, the premier said. Okay, so one reason I picked this article too is there's a lot of interesting words. Okay, so here we have, of course, you know, Tiananmen Square, right? Is the Tiananmen, you know, the big square. Now, in many places, instead of saying a square, not with this place, but other places, what's another word that we can often use for square? Plaza, yeah. So, you know, like if you go to some places, instead of saying square, they'll say plaza. Yeah, Plaza. Now, if you want to be Italian about it, there's another word. If you go to Italia, they have a word at piazza. I think I'm spelling that right. It looks like pizza, but it's not pizza. Yeah, but piazza is the same idea. It means plaza, okay? So if you ever visit Italy or you go somewhere and you see a word that says piazza, it's not pizza. Remember, there's an A there. So the plaza, you know, sometimes I know in Taiwan even sometimes I've seen the word plaza used instead of square. But anyhow, it's all the same meaning. Why don't we say together plaza? Plaza. And then let's try this Italian word. In Italian, when we have the two Z's, it's piazza. Okay, so why don't we say together piazza? Piazza. Okay. So here it says the discussion of Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, this is a word, I don't know if we've learned this before, but what is a massacre? Well, genocide's a little bit broader. Genocide is a very broad term. Like if you try to kill a whole group of people, like, if you try to wipe out a whole race, okay, like we had during the Germans with the Jews during World War II. But massacre is just when a lot of people are killed at one time, okay? Like a mass killing, yeah, exactly. So it's not an accident. This is actually murder, right? It's not like a disaster. If we had a typhoon or a natural disaster where lots of people were killed, that would not be a massacre. So a massacre is only when someone is intentionally killed, a group of people, like he said, a mass killing. When we say mass, that's M-A-S-S. Mass means lots of people, mass killing, okay? So why don't we say it together? This is an interesting spelling, but we always spell it this way. It's R-E. So let's say it together, massacre. Massacre. Now, massacre can be used as a noun or a verb, okay? You can say they were massacred, okay, with a D, okay? Or you could say there was a massacre, like here it's a noun. It's a noun, 名词. So the word can be used either way. So here it says the discussion of Tiananmen Square is taboo in China. I know we've talked about this word before. What is a taboo? Yeah. So something you cannot talk about. Now, sometimes it's for, of course, here it's for political reasons, right? But sometimes there's other reasons, like, you know, I told you I do a lot of 跨文化训练, cross-cultural training. Often one of the most common questions I get from people who are coming to Taiwan or people from Taiwan who are going to美国 or America or somewhere, they say, are there any subjects that are taboo in conversation? When I'm talking to an American, is there anything that is taboo? Or if I'm talking to a Taiwanese person, is there anything that is taboo? Okay, we could say taboo or a taboo subject. It can become a 形容词. Now, of course, I've told you this before. I always warn my Taiwanese friends, if you go to 美国 and you're talking to somebody, there's one subject that's kind of taboo, and that is we don't talk about personal money questions, right? In Taiwan, this is very common. I mean, sometimes I'm riding in a taxi and the 计程车司机 says, 你的薪水多少钱? And I'm like, huh? You know, they ask me, in America, you cannot ask those kinds of questions. Or you say, you know, someone says, oh, that's a beautiful watch. How much did you pay for it? Or your house is beautiful. How much do you buy it for? In America, you cannot ask those questions. That is taboo. Okay. Now, of course, if it's somebody else's house or somebody else's car, then it's okay. You can say, oh, that's a beautiful house. How much do you think that costs? That's okay. But I can't say how much is your house. Okay. So, or how much do you make? It kind of depends. I mean, I think sometimes if it's somebody you kind of know and, you know, you could ask them politely. You could say, oh, you know, do you have, you know, I think an easy question is, do you have any kids, right? And then if they have any kids, well, oh, you know, or, you know, something like that. So, but usually I think in my advice to people is I say, wait until they mention it. So if someone says, oh, me and my wife are going for holiday this weekend. Oh, I say, oh, your wife, oh, do you have a family or do you have kids? Then it's okay, right? So anyhow, there are certain subjects that are taboo in different places. Okay. And of course, in China, Tiananmen Square is taboo. Or the Tiananmen Square massacre, rather, is taboo. Okay, so let's say it one more time, taboo. Taboo. Okay, so let's go on and look at this article and see what they say. So it says here, President William Lai yesterday commemorated the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre on social media, underscoring the importance of defending democracy and freedom. Okay, now I think I'm pretty sure we've talked about this word, but what is to commemorate to mean? What does that mean? Right, so when you think of commemorate, another way to say this, you can see the word here, you can see M-E-M-O-R, okay? So just think of the word, let me change the screen here, to remember, okay? Okay, so to remember something, now commemorate has a slightly more formal, you know, you remember many things, right? I can remember that today I need to go to my office, right? But if you remember something that's important, okay, sometimes we say to mark, M-A-R-K, to mark or, mark a special day. It means to keep special note of that, okay? So anyhow, commemorate is to remember, but in a formal way, to kind of, I don't want to use the word celebrate. Of course, this is not a celebration, but it could be a celebration, right? It could be, if it was something positive, if it was something good, then we could celebrate it. and that would be a way of commemorating it. But if this is obviously it's a tragedy, so this would be to remember it, but in a very solemn, serious way. Yes. Yeah, we talked about observe, right? I think last week we said to observe a holiday, right? So, yeah, we could say, I think we could use observe. They observe the 36th anniversary means to, and so I think you remember last week we said to observe, which normally means to look at something, right? You can observe the moon, you can observe the sun, you can observe somebody walking down the street, but here to observe means to mark, to remember, to especially with a holiday or a special day. Okay, so here, why don't we say it together? Commemorate. Commemorate. Right, when you look at this word, just think of the word remember, or you can even think of the word memory, right? Memory, okay? So to commemorate. Okay, so they commemorated the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre on social media. Now, here, I think we've talked about this word underscoring the importance of defending democracy. What would be some other words to say underscore? Highlight, underline, emphasize. Yeah, so actually the word underscore literally means, when you're typing, it means to do this, right? That's called underscoring something. It means to put a line under something, okay? Highlight, yeah. If you go to I use these a lot. If you're taking notes and you buy it, there's a special pen called a highlighter. And it usually has a very bright color, right? Like orange or yellow. And you use it to highlight things in your book or when you're writing. That's called a highlighter, that kind of pen. Okay, so why don't we say it together? Underscoring. Underscoring. Okay, so again, we could say to highlight, there's many ways of saying this. Okay, so underscoring the importance of defending democracy and freedom. Okay, so let's read this together. President William Lai yesterday commemorated, one more time, commemorated the 36th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. One more time, massacre. On social media. Underscoring the importance of defending democracy and freedom. Freedom. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, depends. Bill sounds very informal, right? So he just asked an interesting question. In America or England or UK, what's the short word for William is what? Bill, right? Just like Bill Clinton, right? His formal name is William Clinton, but nobody calls him William Clinton. They call him Bill Clinton. So it really depends on personal style, right? I think Bill Clinton probably prefers kind of a casual, American informal style. But I would never call Lai Ching-te, I would never call him Bill. If I did, I don't think he'd be very happy. It would be funny if somebody called him Bill, though. That would make me laugh. So yeah, I often think, sometimes maybe some Americans come to visit him from Meiguo, and they might say, "Hey, Bill, it's nice to meet you." I would be very shocked. So yeah, but anyhow, yeah, in America, some people would go by Bill. Yeah, and of course, we've talked about this a long time ago. Many American names, male and female, have short versions. Like Henry could be Hank, right? Or Richard could be Dick, right? Or what else? Lisa. Elizabeth could be Liz, or yeah, there's many. We could talk about that all day. There's so many variations on these names. So anyhow, it says here, okay, yeah, let's go on. Any other questions about this? Okay, so it goes, let's go on here. It says security was tight and activists faced pressure from police in Hong Kong on the anniversary of China's bloody crackdown on democracy demonstrators in Tiananmen Square on June 4, 1989, an event Lai and U.S. Secretary of State Rubio said the world must not forget. Okay, so of course we say security was tight. Whenever security is very strict or very tough, we usually say it is tight, right? Because, of course, you don't want somebody to squeeze through some terrorist or something like that. So we say tight security. Okay, activists. What are activists? Activists are, we talked about this. They're people who are what? Yeah, fighting for a cause, right? There's many kinds of activists. We have human rights activists. We have animal protection activists. We have environmental protection activists. So if you're fighting for something, you're working for something, people will call them activists, political activists. Okay, so why don't we say together, activists. Activists. Okay, so they face pressure from police in Hong Kong on the anniversary. Okay, and then here it says China, bloody crackdown. Of course, bloody means blood was shed, right? There was people killed or injured or wounded. And crackdown, we've talked about many times, when the police try to stop something. Like, if, recently there's been a crackdown on, well, I hope there's a crackdown on people driving without driver's licenses, right? Or people speeding or people drinking and driving, that we say the police there's a crackdown against that. Or we could say they are cracking down on this, right? So it's two, then it becomes two words. They are cracking down on drunk driving, or they are cracking down on, drugs, taking drugs or illegal drug use. I don't know, there could be many things. Okay, so why don't we say together, crackdown. Crackdown. Okay, on democracy demonstrators. Again, demonstrators, another simple word for that is protesters. Yeah, so if you're demonstrating against something or for something, you are protesting for or against something. So we say to demonstrate as a 动词. So that would be a te, to demonstrate. Now, of course, demonstrate has a very different meaning. Demonstrate can mean show something, right? Like, a demo. So if you go to I love it whenever you go to like a supermarket or something, often there's somebody in a table and they're demonstrating some new product, right? They're saying, if you buy this, this is what it'll do, right? But that's different from this. Okay, let's read this then. Security was tight and activists face pressure. Let's say it again. Activists face pressure from police in Hong Kong on the anniversary of China's bloody crackdown on democracy demonstrators in Tiananmen Square on June 4, 1989. An event Lai and U.S. Secretary of State let's say it one more time. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the world must not forget. Okay. Let's go on. It says public commemorations take place annually in more than 30 overseas cities, including Taipei, where senior government leaders often use the anniversary to criticize China and urge it to face up to what it did. Okay, so urge, of course, means to pressure, to push, right? To urge. I urge you to stop doing this. I urge you to consider this. Okay, so now urge can also be a noun, right? You can say, I have the strong urge to eat chocolate cake, right? I have the strong urge to eat ice cream, right? It means I really feel like I need to do this, okay? So urged it to face up. Now, what does face up mean? Yeah, to face something, to not confront. Confront has a different idea. Like if you confront somebody, you say you should do this. But to face up means to, I think a better way of saying it would be to take responsibility for, right? If you face up to something, you take responsibility for something. You say, okay, yeah, I did that. That was my fault. Okay, I'm going to face up to my mistake, or I'm going to face up to my problem. Okay, it means I'm going to face it. I'm going to take responsibility. Okay, so to face up to what it did. Okay. Here's that word commemorations again. And of course, annually means every year, once a year, right? Well, every year, I guess. Okay, so let's read this together. Public commemorations, commemorations take place annually in more than 30 overseas cities, including Taipei, where senior government leaders often use the anniversary to criticize China and urge it to face up to what it did. Okay, let's say it one more time. Face up to what it did. Okay. Now that's a photo caption. Okay. Let's go on. It says, every year on June 4, Taiwanese society lights candles of remembrance grounded in the universal values shared among democracies, Lai wrote on Facebook. The commemoration is not only to mourn history, but also to perpetuate this memory, he said. Okay, there's a good word here. So it says here, Taiwanese society lights candles. Of course, you know, to light a candle means to light. I don't know if he's talking about doing this literally. I mean, it could be. I know it used to be, I'd see protests and people would light candles. So it might be literally, or he might be talking in a more of a figurative way. Okay, but lights candles of remembrance, okay, grounded in, okay, when you say grounded in, what does that mean? If something based on or with a foundation on something, I will say that sometimes we say someone is very well grounded, okay? When we say someone has well grounded, or they are well grounded in, I don't know, strong values, it means they have a good foundation, okay? They have some strong idea or values that are shaping or forming who they are, okay? So someone is, or you can say his ideas are grounded in whatever, okay? So I'll give you an example. Like I do a lot of Hua and Hua Shunli, and I've told you this many times, but we can often say in this culture, for example, in Taiwan or maybe Korea, the cultural values are grounded in Confucianism, right? You know, what is that? 孔子主义 or whatever. You know, it's the, yeah, okay. So, yeah, so the Confucian ideas or Confucius philosophy, you could say Taiwan's values are grounded in those things. It means that is the foundation for their values. Okay, their ideas. Okay, so anyhow, it says here, remembrance, lights candles of remembrance grounded in what? Universal values, okay? So what are some universal values? Justice? What? You said that everyone what? Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what universal values is. Values that everyone shares. So we might say human rights, justice, you know, what? Freedom, yeah, things like that. So why don't we say together, universal values. Universal values. Now, I will say this word value is important because if somebody asks you, they say, what are your main values for your life? It means it's like saying, what are your personal, like, 主义, your ideas that are important to you? So it could be like some might say, well, I believe in family comes first. I believe in, you know, respecting others. I believe in working hard to make money. I don't know. There could be many values. No, I think he's probably being very honest. If someone says my values are in, I don't know, something very, I don't know, I'm not putting people down, but if someone says my main value is making money, I would be like, okay, well, you're being honest, right? So yeah. Okay, so it's shared among democracies. These are universal values shared among democracies. Okay, now it says the commemoration, there's a good word here. It says the commemoration is not only to mourn. Of course, we know the word to mourn, right? What is to mourn? It could be to show grief. Yeah. So what do we mourn? We mourn many things, right? Of course, if somebody important to us or someone we love passes away, we mourn them, right? I know people mourn pets, right? If pets are very important to people. If their pet passes away, they may mourn them. But we might mourn other things, right? We might mourn the fact that we can no longer do certain things, right? I know sometimes people who used to be very good athletes, right? Maybe they could run very fast or they could do something very well, and then they lose that ability, and they might mourn that, right? They might feel sorrow over that. Okay, so why don't we say together, mourn. 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 Okay, so this is not only to mourn history, but also to perpetuate this memory. This is a good word. What does perpetuate mean? To continue it, yeah, to make sure it keeps going. Now, there's a good word that I think you've probably seen from this one. Maybe you know. It's a 形容词, perpetual. Okay. Yeah, and so what is perpetual? Well, I'll just add a couple words here. Sorry, this is the main word here. Don't worry about this. What does perpetual mean? Or forever. It means it just keeps going. It doesn't stop, right? So it's very funny. Over the years, over the centuries, some people have tried to invent a perpetual motion machine, which means a machine that never stops, right? It just keeps going on its own power. But of course, I'm not a scientist, but I believe that goes against the laws of physics, right? Because everything slows down over time. It loses its momentum. But perpetual motion just means it just keeps moving. It never stops, okay? So if something is perpetual, we can use this word for many different things. You can say, I don't know. I'm not thinking of anything right now. What? Yeah, perpetual. Yeah, but actually, you mentioned a good word, because often a better word, instead of when we describe many things, is simply the word eternal. Okay, so if something is eternal, it's forever, right? Eternal love, right? People talk about that. Eternal life, okay? Things that just never end. So perpetual is okay. I mean, it's a good word, but eternal is more of a broad, when we talk about grand ideas and things like love and life and things like that, we talk about eternal. Okay, so, but anyhow, to perpetuate means to make sure this continues, to keep it going. We need to perpetuate certain things, right? Okay, so let's start with that word over there. Let's say it together, perpetual. 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 And then the word above, eternal. 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 And then this word here is a 动词, perpetuate. Perpetuate. Remember the T has a ch sound to it. Perpetuate. Perpetuate. Okay. And just I forgot to mention eternal. What's the 名词? What's the noun version of that? Eternity. Right. Good word. So if someone says, I'm going to do this for all eternity, it means forever, okay? Eternity means forever. It's a noun, okay? So why don't we say that word too? Eternity. Eternity. Yeah. So these are good words. I don't think we've learned perpetuate before. Okay, so let's go on and read this 2 paragraphs here. It says, every year on June 4, Taiwanese society lights candles of remembrance. Remembrance. Grounded in the universal values values shared among democracies. Democracies. Lai wrote on Facebook. The commemoration, one more time, commemoration is not only to mourn history, but also to perpetuate this memory, he said. Right. Okay. So this is perpetuate. That's a great word. Okay. Let's go on. It says authoritarian regimes erase history, while democratic societies choose to preserve the truth and refuse to forget those who gave their lives and their dreams to the idea of human rights, he added. Okay. So I think we've talked about this before. What does an authoritarian government mean? Yeah, but what is it usually? It means that if something is very authoritarian, it means that there's no democracy, right? It's it's controlled by one group of people or a certain person, okay? So I mean, it's, when I introduce Taiwan history, I say Taiwan was not always a democracy. Taiwan used to be have a very authoritarian government, right? So why don't we, China, of course, we could describe that today as authoritarian. Now, authoritarian is a general word, but there's another word sometimes we use that's even more extreme. Yes. So if someone says totalitarian, okay, think of the word total, okay? Totalitarian means there's absolutely no freedom, okay? I think of, when I think of totalitarian governments today, I think of North Korea, right? That's the first one that comes to my mind because it's completely under the control. There's absolutely no freedom there. The government has control over everything. Okay. Well, that would be, I would say that'd be a totalitarian, government, yeah. I mean, some people would describe China as a totalitarian government because they control every aspect of life. So I think that totalitarian is more of they're similar, but totalitarian is usually considered more extreme than authoritarian. Okay, so let's say that first word together, authoritarian. Authoritarian. Then the second word, totalitarian. Totalitarian. Okay. When you think of authoritarian, just think of the word authority, right? Authority, the government authorities, right? So authoritarian means like the government controls everything. And we talked about this word many times. But regime was what? It's a kind of government. But when we say regime, it usually does not mean a democracy. It doesn't mean 民主. We never use the word regime for 民主. We only use the word regime for totalitarian governments, authoritarian governments, dictatorships. We say regime. Now, it's a French word, so the word, this G sound here, we say with a j, like a j. French like to use that. So let's say it together, regime. Regime. Right. So it says authoritarian regimes erase history. What is erase? To wipe out, right? Like when you're a kid in school, you have an eraser, right, on your pen. It's very funny. In my house, I only have one or two pencils, right? I don't use pencils much anymore. But I remember I was using a pencil and I wanted to erase it and I couldn't find an eraser. I was like, what do I do? Because, usually you have an eraser or the eraser on the back of the pencil gets very, very hard and then it doesn't work anymore. But that's what an eraser is. It's usually a soft, like rubber thing and you use it to erase things. Okay, so why don't we say together, erase. Erase. Okay, so it says, while democratic societies choose to preserve truth. Now, preserve means to maintain, to keep, to perpetuate, right? To preserve. They refuse to forget those who gave their lives and their dreams to the idea of human rights or 人权. Okay? So let's read this together. Authoritarian regimes. Let's say it one more time. Authoritarian regimes erase history, while democratic societies choose to preserve the truth and refuse to forget those who gave their lives and their dreams to the idea of human rights. He added. Okay, that's a photo. Okay, so let's keep going. It says the threat of authoritarianism by military intimidation, gray zone coercion, surveillance, and extraterritorial repression remain a global challenge to democratic societies, Lai said, without naming China. Of course, he was referring to China, but yeah. So there's a lot of big words here, right? So here we have authoritarian. We talked about authoritarian, right? But whenever we have an ISM at the end, what does that mean? But yeah, whenever you add ISM to anything, it just means like a 主义, right? Like communism, authoritarianism. Yeah, there's a lot of isms out there, right? So yeah, it just means that kind of, it's the idea, the 主义 of something. So why don't we say it together? Authoritarianism. Authoritarianism. Yeah, it becomes a very long word. It says by military, of course that means 军事, right? Military intimidation. What does intimidation mean? Yeah, it's like threatening. Now this comes from the 动词, to intimidate with a te, right? To intimidate. If you intimidate somebody, it means you make them fearful. Okay? How do we intimidate people? We might do them by shouting at them. We might try to be very big, or we might actually pretend like we might hit them, but we try to intimidate somebody. Sometimes you meet somebody who is very intimidating, right? It becomes a 形容词, right? If you say, wow, that person is very intimidating. I'm sure you've been in that situation before, right? You meet somebody for the first time and you just feel very scared, or a little bit like, I don't know what I should say. Maybe because they're physically very big, right? Sometimes you meet people and they're just really big people. But sometimes it's the way they talk, right? Maybe they're very aggressive, right? And you say, well, this person feels very intimidating, okay? So this is now I will say intimidating can be also not just a person. It could be a situation, right? Let's say you go for your job interview, like a 面试, right? And you walk into the job interview and you can say, wow, this situation was very intimidating to me. Or this environment, it intimidates me, or is very intimidating. It means it makes me feel fearful, okay? A little bit scared, okay? So why don't we start with the 动词, to intimidate. Okay, with a te. One more time. To intimidate. One more time. Intimidate. Okay, and then let's use this as a 形容词, intimidating. Intimidating with the ing. Sorry, one more time. Intimidating. Intimidating. And then this word, intimidation. Intimidation. Okay, so it's saying that they use intimidation or military intimidation. That's one way that they threaten other countries. Okay, gray zone in coercion. Now, I think you've heard this. What did they call it? 灰色 something. Yeah, it's a very common word. 10 years ago, nobody used this term, but it's become a very common term. We say gray zone. Zone is what? An area, right? So we say gray zone. Now, this word is a very good word. I don't know if we've learned it before. It comes from the word, the 动词, to coerce. And what does to coerce mean? Yeah, to pressure somebody to do something, to push them to do something. So you can say, I was coerced into going shopping today by my friend, even though I didn't want to go shopping, right? They pushed me to go shopping, or I was coerced into doing that. Okay, so if you are kind of pushed or pressured into doing something, usually something you don't want to do, you can say you were coerced. Okay, sometimes somebody commits a crime, right? And the police arrest them and they say, it wasn't my fault. He coerced me to do that, right? He forced me to do that. Okay, so why don't we say together, to coerce. To coerce. And then when we turn that into a noun, coercion. Coercion. Okay, so we have gray zone coercion. Surveillance, okay, you know what surveillance is, right? We've talked about that many times. You know, like we have surveillance cameras, right? Surveillance means to watch something, right? You know, you're going to survey. Sometimes the police will have surveillance on somebody. They'll watch somebody because they want to, they suspect they're doing something. So why don't we say together, surveillance. 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 Often we say he is under surveillance or he is under police surveillance. It means the police are watching him, okay? So, and then here's a big word. It says extraterritorial repression. Okay, does anyone know? First of all, you can see this word here, territory, right? Okay, what does extraterritorial mean? Outside your country. Whenever you say the word extra like that, it means outside of, okay? Outside of something. Oh, yeah, extra, but that's actually, that's a slightly different word, extraterrestrial, okay? That means ET, like an alien, right? It's a slightly different word, but terrestrial means earth, right? So extraterrestrial, I don't know if let me try to spell this word. Extraterrestrial. RES, right. Is it two R's? Yeah. Okay, that looks right. When we refer to terrestrial, terrestrial, it means on earth, this earth, okay? So if we say extraterrestrial, it means it's not from this earth, it's outside of this earth. So that's where we get the word ET. You've seen the movie, right? ET Go Home, you know. I'm not going to try to imitate him, but yeah, we say, oh, ET, it means alien, something from outside this earth. Okay. Oh, I forget. Very, very young. But it's still on TV. You can still watch it, right? It's a good movie. Steven Spielberg, right? Directed it. Yeah. And I was going to say, you don't lie to me. I'm sure all of you, when you watch ET, you cried, right? Okay. So yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. I'm not even going to go there. I've heard that word. But anyhow, these are all, when you see again, the word extra means outside of, okay? So extraterritorial repression, what is repress? To repress means what? To crack down, to push some. So if we talk about political repression, it means you take away somebody's freedom. You repress somebody politically. You don't give them any freedom. So people can be repressed in many different ways, right? Someone can even be emotionally repressed, right? If someone is there, someone forces them, they cannot show any emotion, or whatever. Political repression, it means to force down so that you don't have any freedom. Okay, so extraterritorial repression means that some governments repress outside of their country. They do something to repress others outside of their country, right? I'll give you an example. This is one that comes to my mind. I read about this a lot. Chinese students that go to university students that go to other countries, they say that even when they're in other countries, they're under a lot of repression, right? Because people are always watching them. And if they say something or do something, they might get a telephone call that says, hey, we know your family and where they live, right, in China. So they are, that's extraterritorial repression. It's not inside China, it's outside of China. They are repressed. So let's try to say these very long words together. Extraterritorial. Extraterritorial. Now again, territorial, I forgot to mention, just means your territory, right? Territorial, you can say this is our territory, territorial control over our area. Okay, this is an even more difficult word. Let's first start with this word, terrestrial. Terrestrial. Extraterrestrial. Extraterrestrial. Okay, I think it's easier just to say ET, right? Yeah, but yeah, anyhow, that's what those words mean. So extraterrestrial repression remain a global challenge to democratic societies. So he's saying these are all ways or methods that authoritarian governments use, around the world. Okay, so let's read this together. The threat of authoritarianism one more time. Authoritarianism by military intimidation, gray zone coercion, surveillance, and extraterritorial repression. One more time. Extraterritorial repression. Remain a global challenge to democratic societies. Lai said, without naming China. Okay. So anyhow, all I can say is 加油, because these are very big words, right? Don't feel discouraged if you have a hard time saying these words, because these are big words. We don't, even for Americans, they're big words. So yeah. Anyhow, it's good to learn some of these things. Okay, so it says here, Taiwan stands on the front lines of defending democratic values worldwide and would continue working with like-minded partners to safeguard the status quo and protect democracy and freedom, he said. Okay, so we've talked about this before. When we say he stands on the front lines or Taiwan stands on the front lines, what does that mean? What does the front line mean? Well, sorry? Yeah, direct face. When we talk about a front line, it means that there is a war or a conflict, right? So whenever you're fighting, let's say there's a war, and the front line is not the red line. It's where you're fighting, right? The front line is if you're in the front line, you're fighting the enemy. You're not in the back, right? You're in the front. So if you're standing on the front line, means you're in the very front of this conflict, of this war. Now, of course, this is not a real actual combat war, but he means Taiwan is defending democratic values. So to defend democracy, Taiwan is in the front line, right? We're not sitting in the back somewhere relaxing, 放松. We're in the front lines, we're fighting actively against something. Does everybody understand that? So to have a front line, there needs to be a war or a conflict. Not necessarily a real war, but some kind of conflict. Now, of course, here the war is to defend democracy, right? Yeah, to confront, but it means, to stand at the very front, okay? So Taiwan stands on the front lines of defending democratic values, okay? We could say democratic ideas or values. Actually, another word for values that we often use is ideals. Now, idea, right, is something you say, oh, I have a great idea, but what is an ideal? Ideal is more like a 主义. something that I believe, okay? You can say he has very high ideals about, whatever, it means some idea, belief. Idea is just something, I have an idea, but ideal is something much deeper, okay? So why don't we say together, ideals. Ideals. Now, if we use ideal as a 形容词, if we say that is an ideal situation, what would be another word for that? Perfect, yes. If you say, wow, this is really ideal, it means it's perfect, okay? This is an ideal opportunity for you to, get a new job or do something. It means it's perfect, okay? In fact, I have a friend who says he doesn't like to use the word perfect ideal because he says that's not really true. It's not always perfect or ideal, but I think it's a good word. You can say this is ideal opportunity. This is an ideal situation. So it's a slightly different meaning from that word, ideals. No, idealistic is okay. If someone has very strong ideas, or ideals rather, about something, that means we could say they are very idealistic. You know how it is? Sometimes you talk to somebody and they're like, you say, well, how about this? And they're like, no, this cannot be this way. I think we should do it this way. I think this, they have very strong ideals. So we say they are idealistic. Okay? That's IDALISTIC. Idealistic. Okay? Yeah. So anyhow. Sometimes, sometimes we say idealistic people. Let me just write that up. Sometimes we say idealistic people, or I shouldn't say idealistic. Sometimes we say people who are overly idealistic might be considered naive, right? You know what naive means? Yeah, it means you're not really thinking realistically. So idealistic, often we compare this word to realistic. Do you live in the real world or do you just live in this world of idealism? Okay. Again, I think idealism is good, but and it's good to be idealistic about certain things. But if you're overly idealistic, maybe you're not being realistic, or some people might say you are being naive. Okay. So these are good words to know because people often use these to contrast each other. Okay, so why don't we say together, idealistic. Idealistic. Realistic. Realistic. Naive. Naive. Okay. So, sorry? Naive? Yeah, I think it's French. Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of English words that come from the French. Of course, if you go back several hundred years, many people in England spoke French, right? Because there's a really strong connection between those. The Norman 1066, I think it was. Yeah. Okay. So anyhow, when we say continue working, we talked about this last week, I think, like-minded partners. When someone is like-minded, I think it's pretty obvious. What does that mean? They think the same way you do, right? You can say we have like-minded ideas, or we are like-minded, or I'm working with some like-minded people. It means people who have the same idea. Their mind is like my mind, right? So it's like-minded. Okay, so why don't we say together, like-minded. Like-minded. So yes. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it means that you are saying, although like-minded, I think it's slightly different. If you say you are speaking my language, it means it could mean you're like-minded, but it could also mean that I like what you're saying. You're speaking my language, okay? If someone you're talking is having a discussion, they say something, you're like, wow, I really like what they just said. You're speaking my language means I like what you're saying, okay? I think that means you're saying exactly what I'm thinking. So yeah, if you say you took the words right out of my mouth, it means you took my words. It means that you're saying what I was going to say, or you're saying what's on my mind, basically. If you took the words right out of my mouth, okay. Well, we sing the same song. There's a funny saying sometimes. If you really like what somebody's saying, you could say, yeah. This is a funny saying, right? It's kind of like saying, it's like complimenting yourself and complimenting them, right? So if someone says something, you think, wow, yeah, I agree with you totally. And you say, brilliant minds think alike. It means that I'm brilliant means very smart, right? So it means I'm smart and you're the same way. So we're both smart, right? Yeah. Okay. I mean, is it the same idea? Okay. So in a way, it's funny. It's like complimenting them, but it's also complimenting yourself because I'm saying I'm brilliant and you're brilliant too. So why don't we say together, brilliant minds think alike. Again, brilliant minds think alike. Right. And brilliant simply means very what? Bright. Yeah, bright, which also means smart, intelligent, right? So brilliant, of course, usually means light. If we say the light in this room is really brilliant, or the sun is especially brilliant today, or bright, okay? So bright or brilliant can mean like strong light, or it can mean someone's very smart. Like you can say he is a brilliant scientist. Now, I will say I think brilliant has a slightly stronger idea than bright. If we say she is a bright student, it means she's smart. But if we say she's a brilliant student, it means she's really amazing. You know, I was talking to a friend who works at a technology company, and he has one of his friends came from 美国 to Taiwan, and I just met this guy, and this guy was very relaxed, very 很轻松的. He's very casual, you know. But my other friend said, "Oh, this guy is brilliant. He's super smart." So if someone's brilliant, it means they're just, when we say Einstein, right, we say Einstein was brilliant, okay? But bright just means, you know, smart, sharp. Sometimes we say sharp, right? S-H-A-R-P. Okay. Yeah, diamond's brilliant. Yeah, it's very shiny. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You are what? You're telling me. You tell me? I don't think we would say. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we would quite say it that way. And we have to be careful because if you tell off somebody, that means you are 骂他们, right? So to tell off, T-E-L-L-O-F-F, you say, I told him off. It means I scolded him. I 骂他, right? I was telling him off, or I told him off. But yeah, I think what you're trying to say, if you say you're telling me, right? It's the way you say it. If someone says, wow, today is just super hot, and you say, wow, you're telling me. It's the way you say. You have to say it that way. You're telling me. What that means is you're completely correct. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so yeah, I think it's the way you say it. You have to say, you're telling me, right? Means, yeah, wow, yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so yeah, sometimes the expressions, we have to say them in a certain way, right? Okay. Okay, so one more thing here. It says to safeguard. What's another word for safeguard? To protect, right? We safeguard certain things. We safeguard our security, our ideas, our democracy. Okay, so why don't we say together, safeguard. Safeguard. And we've talked about this before. This is a very common word in Taiwan. When we talk about Taiwan, what does status quo mean? It means we keep things the way they are, okay? The situation as it is. And in Taiwan, you know, it's a Latin word, and we use it a lot to describe, you know, we say, oh, we need status quo between Taiwan and China. It means we don't change anything. China doesn't do anything. Taiwan doesn't do anything. We just keep everything the same as it is, okay? So why don't we say together, status quo. Status quo. Yeah, this is a very common expression to talk about Taiwan and China. Okay, so let's read this together. Taiwan stands on the front lines front lines of defending democratic values. Let's say this part again. Democratic values worldwide, and would continue working with like-minded partners to safeguard the status quo. Let's say it again. Status quo. And protect democracy and freedom. He said. Okay. Let's go on. It says, Taiwan endured decades of authoritarian rule before transitioning to democracy through the sacrifices and efforts of countless democracy activists, Lai said. Now, we've talked about this many times. What is to endure? To put up with, to go through something. So you might endure a sickness for a long time, right? If you have to endure something. Or you might have to say, like, this last winter was very, very cold, right? This winter seemed to go on forever, right? It never seemed like spring would come. So we could say, I endured this very long winter. It means I went through it. I kind of just bore it. I had to bear with it, okay? So why don't we say together, endured. Endured. Now, if we turn that into a 形容词, we can say enduring, right? You can say his enduring love. It means his continuing love. It just goes on, right? To endure, enduring means just keeps going. Okay, so Taiwan endured decades of authoritarian rule. Of course, we talked about that. Before transitioning, what does transition mean? To change. Yeah, if you transition, you move from one time to another time, or one status to another status, to transition, right? Okay, so why don't we say together, transitioning. That's slightly different. Transit actually means like physically moving. Like, I'll give you an example. If you go to an airport and you get off one airplane and then you are a transit passenger, you have to get from one airplane to another airplane and continue. We say there's a transit. That's transit. But transit also is used in like a 捷运, right? MRT, mass rapid transit. TRAN. Let me just write this down. It's a very similar word. Transit. So when you see the word MRT, it means mass rapid transit. Okay? It means they're moving back and forth very quickly, hopefully. Yeah, transitioning, it means before it's a verb. But a transition can also be a 名词. You can say, right now I'm going through a big transition in my life. It means a big change in my life. Okay? So why don't we say that word first? Transition. Transition. Transitioning. Transitioning. And then that word, transit. To transit. Right. They're similar words, but they're slightly different ideas. Yeah. Okay, so transitioning to democracy through the sacrifices and efforts of countless democracy activists. What does this word mean, countless? Yeah, if something is countless, it means I can't count it. There's too many, okay? So numerous, yeah, but I think countless is even more than numerous, because numerous means many, right? But if you say, okay, I'll give you an example. How many times have you looked at on a clear night when there's no air pollution, you look at the sky and there's countless stars in the sky? Now, I guess if you really wanted to count them, you could probably try. but we often say the stars are countless, right? You can't count them. There's so many. So we say countless. Occasionally, yeah. Especially after it rains, right? Sometimes I look out at night after a strong rain. You can see the stars. Actually, I feel like I can see more stars recently than I could about 5 years ago. Maybe that's Taidian has turned down their power plant or something. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Or maybe there's just less air pollution. So yeah. So why don't we say together, countless. Countless. Okay. So let's read this. Taiwan endured decades of authoritarian rule before transitioning to, let's say it again, transitioning to democracy through the sacrifices and efforts of countless democracy activists. Let's say it one more time. Countless democracy activists. Activists. Lai said. Okay, that's another photo. Okay, let's read this. It says, we deeply understand the value of freedom and must not ignore the threats posed by authoritarian expansion to global democracy and the rule of law, he said. Okay, Rubio on Tuesday praised the courage of Chinese who were killed in the bloody crackdown. Okay, so he says here, we deeply understand the value of freedom and must not ignore. Okay, when we say must not ignore means we must pay attention to. Okay, you don't want to ignore it. Must not ignore the threats, okay, 风险 posed by. Okay, we say often there is a threat posed by, or this poses a threat to me. Okay, like some people think driving in Taiwan poses a big threat to their personal security. Okay, so we say this poses a threat, means it creates a threat. It is a threat. Okay, threats posed by authoritarian expansion means authoritarian governments or systems that are expanding. So this is a threat posed by this to what? A threat posed by to, the threat is to global democracy, okay, and the rule of law. Rule of law just means we follow the law, right? We don't just follow what somebody wants or what some leader says, but we follow the rule of law. This is a very common phrase, rule of law. Okay. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, they have laws too. Yeah, but rule of law. Yeah, yeah. So when we talk about democracies, we use this term a lot, rule of law, not by law. Okay. Okay, so let's read this. We deeply understand the value of freedom. Freedom. And must not ignore the threats posed by authoritarian expansion. One more time. Authoritarian expansion to global democracy and the rule of law, he said. Rubio on Tuesday praised the courage of Chinese who were killed in the bloody crackdown. One more time, bloody crackdown. Okay. He says, let's read this. It says, today we commemorate the bravery of the Chinese people who were killed as they tried to exercise their fundamental freedoms, as well as those who continue to suffer persecution as they seek accountability and justice for the events of June 4, 1989, Rubio said in a statement. So there's some big words here. We've already talked about commemorate, right? We could say today we remember We could simply say we remember. We commemorate the bravery of the Chinese people who were killed. Okay, we say they tried to exercise their fundamental freedoms. Now, this word exercise your freedom, or we could say to exercise your rights. Exercise, usually we think of 运动, right? But what does it mean here? To carry out, to take action, to use, we say, I'm going to exercise my right to do something. Means I'm going to use it. Okay? So why don't we say together, to exercise. Okay. Now here, this is a good word. What does fundamental mean? Basic. Yeah. It's when I think of the word fundamental, I think of the word foundation. Right? It's a basic. It's like the thing we start with. It's at the bottom of everything. Okay, so why don't we say together, fundamental. Fundamental. So we might talk about fundamental freedoms, your basic freedoms. We might say fundamental truth, right? The basic truth. Okay, there's many fundamental things. Okay, so fundamental freedoms, as well as those who continue to suffer persecution. Now, I don't know if we've actually learned this word before, but persecution comes from a 动词, to persecute. And what does that mean? Right. If you persecute somebody, it means that you, like you said, to oppress somebody, to give them trouble, to make them suffer, to try put them down. Okay, he used the word oppress. To oppress. Oops. Anyhow. To oppress. Okay, to push down. To. Okay, so let's think of some examples. If someone in some governments, how do they persecute people? They put them in jail. They. There's many ways that we can, people are tortured, right? People are killed. I guess that would be a kind of oppression. They might lose their jobs, right? There's many ways to persecute somebody or oppress somebody. Okay, so that turns into the word persecution. Yes? Oh, yeah. I would say to suppress. And repress, we talked about that word earlier. So you notice these words all sound the same. Oppress is more like, governments will oppress people. They will persecute people, authoritarian governments usually. Suppress means to push down. So we could suppress ourselves, right? I suppressed my desire. I suppressed my words. I suppressed. Okay, let me give you an example. Remember earlier I said I have the urge to eat chocolate. Okay. But you can also say then I suppressed my urge to eat chocolate. Okay. I suppressed my urge to leave. Okay, it means I pushed that down. I did not do it. So suppress is something that we often use for ourselves. You suppress your own words. You suppress your urge. You suppress your desire. Okay, it means you push it down. Okay, but repress is again more of a. We can use repress for yourself too. You repress but it also means you can repress someone else. Like a government can be repressive. Okay, so these words can be used. Sometimes they're very similar to each other, but sometimes they're different. And it can be a little bit challenging because you're like, well, which word do I use? Do I use the word oppress, suppress, or repress, right? But I think, again, if it's for yourself, it's often the word suppress, okay? I suppress my urge to eat chocolate. I suppress my desire to criticize him, okay? But anyhow, if you have questions about that, it's a little bit complicated. So why don't we say these words together? To oppress. To oppress. To suppress. To suppress. To repress. To repress. Yeah, very similar. Okay, so once again, let's go back to this word. To persecute. To persecute. I will say, when you see this word persecute, it's people are usually persecuted for their political ideas or their religious ideas. This word gets used a lot for those things, religious or political, things like that. Okay, so then this word, persecution. Persecution. Okay, and it says they suffer persecution while they seek or look for accountability. Okay, what does accountability mean? Sorry? To take responsibility. Right. So if the Chinese government were to take accountability for Tiananmen Square massacre, it means they would take responsibility. They would say, okay, yeah, we did that. Okay, we were wrong. Okay, so to take accountability means to take responsibility for something. Now, sometimes we can say you are accountable for that. It means you are responsible for that. Like, let's say there's a mistake and you're like, okay, who made this mistake? Okay, it was you, so you are accountable for that mistake. It's like saying you are responsible. That's on you. That's your fault. Okay? Or you can say, I will take accountability for my mistakes. Means I will take responsibility for my mistakes. So this is a good word. So again, this word can be to be accountable, B-L-E. Okay? So why don't we say accountable? Accountable. You can say he is accountable for that problem. Okay, and then here, accountability. Accountability. So you can say, I am accountable for that, or he is accountable for that. Or you can say, I will take, then we use the word take accountability for something. It means I will accept responsibility for that. Okay, so as they seek, now these people are seeking accountability and justice for the events of June 4th. Of course, they're seeking accountability not from themselves, but from the government, like you said, from officials that were responsible. Okay? Any questions about that? Some big words we're learning here today. But these are good words. Okay, so let's read this. Today we commemorate the bravery of the Chinese people who were killed as they tried to exercise their fundamental freedoms. Once again, fundamental freedoms, as well as those who continue to suffer persecution. One more time. Continue to suffer persecution. As they seek accountability and justice for the events of June 4, 1989. Rubio said in a statement. Okay. So, there's a lot of photos in this picture. Okay. Let's read a couple more paragraphs and then we'll go to a new story. It says here, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, actively tries to censor the facts, but the world will never forget, he said. Okay, let's read this here. Premier Zhou Yong, is it Yong, right? Yong Tai, not Zhong, it's Yong, right? Zhong, oh, wrong, okay, oh, wrong, yeah, sorry, wrong. Yeah, these romanization systems. Zhou Rongtai wrote on Facebook that June 4, 1989 has become a taboo topic in China, while Taiwan has taken the opposite path by cultivating the soil of democracy and sowing the seeds of freedom. So this is a very interesting expression. Now, it's June 4th is a taboo topic, okay? We've talked about this, right? If you go to China today and you say, June 4, I think you're going to get in big trouble. I don't know if you saw yesterday on the news at Tiananmen Square, there's a bunch of people there and some guy jumps over the barrier and starts running for the flagpole. And of course, all these security guys come out and jump on top of him and carry him off and throw him in a van. But I don't know what he was trying to do. I don't know, maybe if he wanted to climb the flagpole or what, but he started running. It was amazing how fast the guards got on top of him. But so it's a taboo topic in China. While Taiwan has taken the opposite path. Now, of course, path is like a way, like a 路线, right? The opposite road, the opposite path. By what? Cultivating. Now, what does to cultivate mean? Grow. A simple word for grow, to grow. Now, what do you cultivate? You cultivate plants. You can cultivate knowledge, right? When you go to school, hopefully, you cultivate your knowledge. Or sometimes we say to cultivate your wisdom, right? Okay, so, or cultivate good manners, right? You know, we cultivate many things. So why don't we say together, to cultivate. To cultivate means to grow. But here it says to cultivating the soil. Soil means what? Earth, ground, tool, right? Of democracy and sowing the seeds. Now we know what seeds are, right? What does sowing mean? Plants, yeah. How do people sow seeds? Often they throw them, you know, or they, yeah. So anyhow, why don't we say together, sowing the seeds. Okay, of freedom. Yeah. Okay, so let's read this together. Premier Zhou Rongtai wrote on Facebook that June 4, 1989 has become a taboo topic. Taboo topic in China, while Taiwan has taken the opposite path by cultivating, let's say it again, cultivating the soil of democracy and sowing the seeds of freedom. Right. Okay. Sorry, I forgot to read this one too. We skipped it over this. I forgot to mention, what does censor mean? Not just to monitor. Censor means to limit the freedom of speech. Okay. Now that might be written speech, or that might be spoken. Okay. So authoritarian governments use a lot of we say censorship, S-H-I-P. Censorship becomes a 名词, okay? Censorship means, for example, it was very, very funny. I don't know if you saw this on the news about 2 weeks ago. It was global news. In China, there was a TV news anchor on the TV station, a woman, and she was talking about Taiwan. And she said, 2 countries, 2个国家. And it was really funny because she stopped. She paused, and you could tell that it was like, oh no. And then she continued, but she was not supposed to say country, right? She was not supposed to say 国, because to describe Taiwan. And so I'm sure they censored that. I'm sure they cut it out. So if you censor something, it means you delete it, you cut it, or you limit it so that people can't say it. So we talk about censorship. Sometimes people are saying something, you say they'll censor. But I will say that even sometimes in a democracy, they will censor certain words. Why? Because they're obscene, 脏话, right? So sometimes, you know, someone's talking, something will be like beep, you know, it'll beep it. That's censoring their words out. So you cannot hear the word they said because it's considered a bad word, right? So they censor it. Yeah, for the TV stations, and I think movies too. I think FCC is movies, TV, radio. I know for radio too. So they will sometimes, what? That's a good question. I don't know if the FCC, maybe the I don't know if that covers magazines and newspapers or not. That's a very good question. I'll have to research that. Yeah. Not that I know of. Why? So I'll give you, this is kind of silly, I think. But let me there is a kind of speech in America that we talk about. We call it politically correct speech. Oops. Now we could say politically correct speech. What that means is sometimes people say, oh, you should not say this or you should say that. So remember, we've talked about this before. In America now, we never say policemen. Why? Because there's women, right? So we say police officers, right? And that's okay. I mean, that's completely correct because there are many female police officers. So of course, we can't say policemen. We don't say firemen anymore. We say firefighter, right? I've noticed one that kind of, and even in Taiwan, we don't say fisherman anymore. We say fisher. Okay, fisher. So we could say in a way that's kind of politically correct speech, although I do think that's completely fine. That's correct. It's accurate. But sometimes this politically correct speech goes too far, right? So what he's referring to, I think, is people used in the last maybe 5 to 10 years in America, some people say it's not good to say Merry Christmas. Why? Because Christmas is a religious word. Right. Well, Christ, right, is 耶稣, right? It's Jesus's birthday, right? So Christmas. So instead of saying Merry Christmas, what do Americans say sometimes? Happy holidays. Okay. This is a very common expression for 圣诞节 in America. So if somebody doesn't want to say Merry Christmas, they say Happy Holidays. They say Happy Christmas, yes. So it is funny. Whenever I write my friends from 澳洲 or 英国, I always say Happy Christmas because they say Happy Christmas. 美国人, they say Merry Christmas. So anyhow, it's no big deal. But I always make a point of doing that. I say Happy Christmas to my British friends. But yeah, so there were many presidents, I shouldn't say many, a few, maybe Joe Biden and Barack Obama, they probably said Happy Holidays because they thought, well, if I say Merry Christmas, what if they're not a Christian? You know, it has the word Christ, which means Yesu. So they would say Happy Holidays. But Donald Trump doesn't care, of course. He just says Merry Christmas, right? And that's what I think most Americans would still say. Most Americans would still say Merry Christmas. But sometimes companies and government, they want to be neutral, right? They don't want to say anything that's politically incorrect, so they say Happy Holidays, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know. This is another similar one, right? This is where it gets a little bit silly, right? People say that, like some people would say you shouldn't say that they are blind, or deaf. Okay? Those are words that we very commonly use, right? But some people say, oh, that's no good. It sounds bad, right? So blind becomes visually challenged, okay? Okay. And deaf becomes what? Yeah, but it's not audio. I don't know. Maybe we can just say hearing challenge. Yeah, same thing. But you said handicap. Some people say handicapped is not a good word, so we should say fit. But even some people say disabled. They say physically challenged. Okay, so that would be physically. Anyhow. Yeah, sorry, that's PHYSICALLY. Sorry, my handwriting's bad. Physically challenged. Okay, so some people say, this is why. They say if you say someone is handicapped or disabled, it means that it makes it sound like they are less of a person, right? Like they can't do certain things, right? But I don't know. I think in America, a lot of people still use the word handicap. Like they say a handicapped parking space, right? They would still, I think that's very common, because if you say physically challenged parking space, that's very long and very awkward. So I think the word handicapped is still used. But again, some people say, oh, well, that's not politically correct, right? Okay, so there are many words like this, and I think that sometimes some of them are good and they're useful, and like saying somebody is like firefighter instead of fireman, of course, because there are many female firefighters. But sometimes it gets out of control. It goes too far, and then people are just like, oh, Swanla, yeah. Well, we would say mentally retarded, right? But that word got used a lot to ma ren, right? People would say, oh, he's a retard, or when I was a kid, we said that a lot. Yeah, and then some people say, oh, that's a word you should never use anymore. But then I've noticed sometimes, after a while, some people are just like, Swana, I'm just going to use it. But it's, we would say mentally challenged, okay? Mentally challenged, okay? So they like to use this word challenged, okay? Visually challenged, hearing challenged, physically challenged, mentally challenged. But yeah, so anyhow, it's again, I'm not saying that all of this is wrong. Some of it's good, but some of it gets a little bit too extreme, and so we get carried away. Yeah. Okay, so let's just read this paragraph, and then we'll quickly go try another story. It says, the Chinese Communist Party, let's say again, Chinese Communist Party actively tries to censor the facts. Okay, let's say it again. Tries to censor the facts. But the world will never forget, he said. Okay. Yeah, so anyhow. Any questions about this? Okay. I do remember, when Taiwan, when I was very, very small, Taiwan was still an authoritarian government. I still remember the government here would censor any mention of China. So when you would get a magazine like Time Magazine, if there was an article on China, they would just black it out. It would all be black. Or you bought some books like an encyclopedia. The section on China was all black, just all covered. Yeah, it was very interesting. So yeah, even Taiwan used to do that back then. I'm sure some of you remember that. Yeah. Many years ago, yeah. Okay, so let's go on and look at a different article. So this was another big story yesterday. I noticed this. I noticed that Taiwan was really covering this too. So why don't we quickly look at this? So Korea has a new president. And many people are talking about him because they're not sure what he's going to do. I have to admit, the first thing I noticed about this president was his glasses. His 眼镜. He has these big round glasses. They're just very interesting. Yeah. Anyhow. So it says here, South Korea's new president vows to restore nation. What does vow mean? To promise, right? To pledge. So sometimes we say to promise, or we could say, we've talked about this word, to pledge. Yeah. Some people might say to swear, but I think pledge or promise is a better word for vow, okay? There are many kinds of vows. We said when two people get married, they often have wedding vows, right? I pledge, I promise, to do this, whatever. Okay, so why don't we say together, vows? Vows. Pledge. Pledge. Okay, and that can be a 动词 or 名词, either way. Okay, they vow to restore. And what's restore mean? Recover. What do we want to restore often? Our what? Yeah, our car, our house, our health, right? If you're sick for a long time, you say, I need to restore my health, right? Or our physical fitness. Let's say you haven't, yundong for a long time, and then you think, oh, I need to restore my fitness. It means I need to get it back. It's like to say to recover, right? To get back, to restore, to return to what it was before. Okay, so it says here, South Korea's new liberal president, Lee Jae-myung, yesterday pledged, there's that word pledge, to raise the country from what he described as near destruction caused by a martial law attempt and revive a struggling economy facing global protectionism. Okay, so first of all, this is a word that they're using to describe him. What does liberal mean? Well, it can mean different things, but if we say politically liberal, what does that mean? Yeah, open to new ideas, but usually it means they're towards the left, right? What's the opposite of liberal? Yes, conservative. Okay, we've talked about this word before. Conservative means 保守, right? Okay, so when we talk about conservative, usually it means they are right. We say they are right. Sometimes we say right wing, right. Liberal, we say, is left. Okay, so why don't we say together liberal. Liberal. Conservative. Conservative. Okay, I was just watching a YouTube discussion, actually several. They were saying that, this is true. They say as people get older, usually they become more and more conservative, right? This is just normal. But they were talking about how during the last presidential election in America, it was very amazing that a lot of young men voted for Donald Trump. Usually young men, they're young, so they would be more liberal, right? But they said young men are voting, the majority of young men, or over 50% of young men voted for Donald Trump. And so they were very, very watching this. And so the Minju is now thinking, how do we talk to young men? Because we need to get them back, right? But because young men have been going over to the Gonghe-dang, right? So let's read that liberal and conservative. Okay, he pledged to raise the country, means raise up, raise the country, Hanguo, from what he described, this is his description, as near destruction. So when we say near destruction, it means it was almost destroyed, okay? By what? Martial law. Okay, what is martial law? This is a word we know in Taiwan because Taiwan also had martial law for 38 years, right? So martial refers to, what's another word? Military, okay? So if we say martial, it's just simply another way of saying military, okay? Okay, so military martial law. Okay, so, in Taiwan, it was like 1949 to 1987, right? Taiwan was under martial law, okay? So remember the former Korean president, he tried to declare martial law, and that's why he got kicked out, okay? So let's read this again. Remember, this word here is pronounced with a sh sound, sh. So let's say martial law. Martial law. Okay, so this near destruction was caused by a martial law attempt. And he also the president wants to revive a struggling economy. Now, here's another word, revive. What does revive mean? To bring back to life or bring back, right? To revive often means it's the idea of to bring back to life, to give new life, okay? So you can say, after I was exercising, I was very tired, and I was revived by drinking some cold water or, supao or whatever, So why don't we say together, to revive? To revive. Okay, so what does he want to revive? A struggling economy, okay? The economy is facing global, 全球. What is protectionism? Here we have the ISM, so it's 主义, right? What does protectionism mean? It means you want to do what? You want to protect your economy. And how do you protect your economy? What's Donald Trump's favorite word? Tariffs, right? Okay, so now there's other kinds of protectionism, right? There's many kinds of ways to protect Yeah, he loves protectionism. So why don't we say together protectionism? Protectionism. So what would be if we're talking about economic protectionism, what would be the opposite of protectionism? Well, but there's a more general term we use. We talk about free trade, right? Free trade means open trade. You can just trade. So free trade, protectionism is usually the opposite of free trade. Okay. So let's read this together. South Korea's new liberal president. Say it again. Liberal president. Lee Jae-myung yesterday pledged to raise the country from what he described as the near destruction caused by a martial law attempt. And revive a struggling economy. Facing global protectionism. Let's say it again, protectionism. Right. Of course, you know what struggling means, right? If you're struggling, it means it's suffering, it's difficult, right? There's a struggle. Okay. So it says here, Lee's decisive victory in Tuesday's snap election stands to usher in a sea change in Asia's fourth largest economy after backlash against a botched attempt at military rule brought down Yoon Suk-yeol's just 3 years into his troubled presidency. There's some good words here. Okay, so first of all, he won, right? So he has a victory. What does decisive mean? It means very strong. If you win a victory and you win decisively, it means you won by, there's no doubt, right? It's, for example, we can say that Donald Trump's victory last year was decisive, right? It wasn't super close. If it's very close, then it's not decisive. But if it's a big victory, we say it's decisive. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So landslide it's very subjective. Sometimes if they say a landslide victory, what does landslide mean? Yeah, like what, 土石流, or yeah. So if you have a president election and someone wins in a landslide victory, it means they win by a lot. But some people would argue, some people say Donald Trump's victory was a landslide victory, but some people say it's not. So it's very subjective. It depends on what you think is a landslide. But decisive just means it's a strong victory. There's no doubt about it. Okay? So why don't we say it together? Decisive. Decisive. Okay. So Lee's decisive victory in Tuesday's snap election. Now this is a very interesting word. What does snap mean? Yeah, you're doing this, right? This is to snap your fingers, right? So when you say a snap something, it means very quick or very sudden. So a snap election is kind of like a sudden election. It's not an election that we plan. It means that suddenly we have an election, a new election. So we call it a snap election. It's actually a political term. We use that word. So why don't we say together, snap? Snap. Yeah, like we snap our fingers. It's very quick. Okay, a snap election stands to usher. It means it will probably, it will potentially, possibly. When we say stands to do something, it means it possibly will. It stands to usher in. Now, this is a good word. To usher in, or to usher, what does that mean, to usher in? To bring in. So I want to show you something. Usher is also a 名词, and it's a person. What is an usher? Right. So, if you go to a concert, 音乐会, right? Sometimes there are people who stand by the entrance, and when you walk in, they say, "Oh, where are you sitting?" Like a movie theater, and they look at your ticket and they say, "Oh, you're sitting over there," or maybe they take you to your seat. That person is called an usher. They're there to tell you, to welcome you in, and often they also tell you where you're sitting. So it's a job, it's a position, it's a person. Okay. So why don't we say together, usher, usher. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we say a robot usher. Yeah. I've never had that happen though. Okay, so it stands to welcome in, we could say to bring in, to usher in a sea change. Now, this is a very interesting expression. Sea change. It means, I'll try to explain this. When we have a sea change, I think this comes from the idea like if you're in the ocean and suddenly the weather starts to change very big. So a sea change means a big change, a very, almost like a revolutionary change, like a very significant change. So that's what, it's just an expression, but we say a sea change, okay? It's very interesting because sea means high, right? So sea change in Asia's fourth largest economy after backlash against. So we talked about this before. What does backlash against something means? It means something that when you react negatively, like badly against something. So let's say that there's the 总统 does something bad, and people are very angry and they 抗议. That's called backlash. So it means you react in a very negative way against something that happened. Does everybody understand that? You can say there is backlash against, okay, let's say tomorrow the government says, okay, we're going to double the price of 电力, right? I'm sure there would be a backlash in Taiwan. People would be like, what? You can't do that. I don't have money to pay for electricity, right? Or if the government says we're going to, raise the price of this or that, and there's a backlash against it, right? So that means there's a very strong reaction against something. Does everyone understand that? No, that's recoil. Yeah. That would be more like to criticize. Yeah, if you lash back against somebody. It's not quite the same. Yeah, backlash. So why don't we say together, backlash? Backlash. Okay, so what was their backlash against? Against a botched attempt at military rule. Now, military rule means martial law, right? We talked about this. Martial law, military rule. Okay, but this is a very good word. Botched. If you botch something, botch can be a 名词, a 动词, or you can say botched as a 形容词. What does botched mean? Yes, it means failed, it means messed up. Okay, if you try to do something and you mess it up, you make a bad mistake. Okay, I'll give you an example. I often see this, for some reason I see this word a lot. In sometimes you hear about someone, maybe a normal person, or sometimes a movie star, and they get plastic surgery. You know what plastic surgery is? Yeah, and they get and then after it's done, there's a big mistake. We say a botched plastic surgery. Like, I'll give you the best example. Michael Jackson. Every time he got plastic surgery, you're like, what? His nose looks strange. So we say that was botched. His plastic surgery was botched, or it was a botched plastic surgery. So it means they tried to do something and it failed. Okay? Does everybody understand that? Okay. So yeah, why don't we say together, to botch. To botch. Botched. Botched. Okay, so this failed attempt at military rule brought down, of course, the former president, he was brought down in 3 years into his troubled presidency. Of course, presidency means his time as president. So his presidency, okay, his troubled presidency. His presidency had many troubles. Okay. Any questions about this? Anything? There's lots of good words today, lots of new words. Okay, so let's read this and then we'll be done. Lee's decisive victory. One more time, decisive victory in Tuesday's snap election, stands to usher in a sea change in Asia's fourth largest economy. After backlash against a botched attempt, one more time, botched attempt at military rule brought down Yoon Suk Yeol just 3 years into his troubled presidency. Let's say that last part, troubled presidency. Right, okay. Okay, so anyhow, it'll be interesting to see what Korea's new president does. Yeah. A backlash could be, but a ripple effect just refers to something that happens, the result, the impact of something. Now, ripple effect could be anything. It could be positive, it could be negative. You know, it's a very interesting expression. She's referring to the word ripple effect. What is a ripple? When you take a rock and you throw it into the water, what happens? It ripples, right? You see these ripples. Ripple are these circles, you know, the circles. So when we say the ripple effect, it means many effects from something that you do. One thing might have many different effects from one action. Yeah. So we call that a ripple effect. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Anything? Good. Well, we'll see you next time then. Thank you.